We're tracking two major developing stories right now. At any moment, the House is slated to hold this monumental vote on the January 6th commission to investigate fully the insurrection at the Capitol, which left 5 dead. Many are tracking how many Republicans ultimately vote against what many have called a search for the basic and full truth of what happened on that terrible day. So we will be watching the vote along with you and our experts. We will see exactly what the tally is, how this fits into the calls for a full accountability beyond just the federal prosecutions that have occurred stemming out of the MAGA insurrection. We'll have that all for you as it happens and unfolds. Breaking news in our hour. Also, the other big story, the legal heat on citizen Donald Trump is hotter than ever as a measurable fact in New York. The Trump Organization under criminal investigation there. New York Attorney General Letitia James confirming this and announcing in something that has shocked and angered Trump world that she is formally joining the Manhattan DA probe in a way that confirms it is publicly a criminal probe of Trump's business dealings, finances, everything going on at Trump Org. The AG's office has alerted the Trump Org to this fact, that it is now an active criminal investigation. Now, up until this point, outsiders viewed what was going on in the Attorney General's office as primarily or likely a completely civil matter. This is a criminal probe. That means, depending on where it heads, that people could wind up in jail. Now, we don't know who this probe is specifically targeting right now. Prosecutors certainly aren't tipping their hands that way. We don't know if it could still end with a finding that there's not enough evidence to do any criminal charges. The fact that a criminal probe exists doesn't mean it ends with charges, of course. And we don't know if there are charges, whether it would be one person or more than one person or who that person would be. But jail being on the table changes everything for anyone anywhere near this thing. For anyone worried that they or their family members, for example, have any potential criminal exposure. This is, simply put, a very big deal. Investigation reaching a point where they have to inform those involved, and anyone involved, of course, has their rights. Now, that could include, of course, the person at the head of this Trump Organization, Donald Trump. Could include other people who were involved in the Trump Organization's recent activities or anything within the New York statute of limitations. Now, this is a big deal. Let me show you something else. We're going to put it up on the screen here. Donald Trump today basically saying what he thinks about all this. It's a corrupt, desperate search of a crime that he implies never occurred. Now, you've seen, if you ever watch the news or, for example, The Beat, you've seen us cover legal proceedings. If Donald Trump is a subject of this, he has every right to make his defense at any time, including impugning or attacking the investigators. But legally, that statement doesn't do anything. And the other big difference is one we all know about. It's one that basically courses through so many of the stories today, including what Congress is deliberating on right now, whether to fully investigate what happened on January 6th. What was January 6th about? It was about Donald Trump losing the election. It was about him being the electoral loser. That means, as a practical matter, he is now a regular citizen. He has no presidential powers to arm him legally or in the courts as he deals with a very serious investigation. He doesn't have a hand-picked attorney general to come in and interpret everything as much as that person, in the instance of Bill Barr and the Mueller probe, or others did to try to help Donald Trump. And he no longer has a pardon power, which in the federal probes that Donald Trump faced proved to be quite pivotal, as he pardoned many people who had his back to the end. That's not all that's different. If you follow these stories, I understand sometimes they can be exhausting, but I want to remind you of something else that is super important. Not important because of what you think about Donald Trump, although it was certainly bad news for him, but important to remind everyone that the rule of law still does function in this country, however imperfectly. There were years of battles over whether Donald Trump could keep his tax returns hidden, not even from the public, but from criminal investigators. Well, he lost that long battle, and that connects to this case tonight because the New York Attorney General is working with the DA who obtained years of tax returns and millions of documents pertaining to Donald Trump and many of the issues under review at the Trump Organization. The Manhattan DA has also been moving closer, we know, to Trump's inner circle, including the money man, Alan Weisselberg. He knows a lot about everything Donald Trump did and wanted done through this Trump Organization. And prosecutors are pressing hard by all the measurements that we can tell in public to get him to cooperate. They even subpoenaed a private school where $500,000 of his grandchildren's tuition was paid for, signed by Weisselberg, which might seem pretty ordinary, or Donald Trump himself, which is not. Michael Cohen definitely turned a lot of people's interest to Weisselberg and the way the money worked when he gave that infamous or famous, depending on who you ask, testimony to Congress in 2019. This was before he went to jail, saying Trump deliberately provided misleading or false valuations in official documents. Remember, lying in day-to-day life, for many people, whatever you think of it, it's not technically a crime. Lying to the government, to tax authorities, to anyone in the New York government about what you have and what you paid, that can be criminal. So keep that in mind before I bring in our experts, because here is what Cohen told me about Trump's money man, Weisselberg.
The only few people that in the Trump organization that know anything about the taxes is Mr. Trump, who knows everything about everything, Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer, Don, Ivanka, and Eric. Those are your five.
That is a Trump lawyer who was in the know for years, talking about a Trump money man who's been in the know all the way up until this year, according to the reports. You take it all in tonight, and while Donald Trump remains one of the most controversial people in public life in the history of the United States, maybe the world, I want to tell you, this news is not about how you feel about Donald Trump or how he performed as president. His performance, however abysmal many people feel it was, we know the bulk of voters turned away from him when given a referendum, is not under review in the courts. Indeed, I will tell you that how good or bad a president was should never matter in the courts. What matters tonight, what's so significant, is that the people who take the oath to enforce these laws without fear or favor or partisan advantage, they are moving towards a more serious review of this as a criminal matter. That should only be because, if they're doing their jobs right, they have evidence, not about Donald Trump, the person or the politician, but about Donald Trump's conduct and the conduct of the organization he ran, and they have evidence that makes them look at this as a criminal probe. And if they find something, well, they are duty-bound to charge it. And if they don't find anything, I want to be clear with you tonight, they're duty-bound to close out the probe. Everyone deserves the due process of this system. It is unusual in the extreme to have someone leave the White House and so soon find themselves in a newly announced criminal probe. It's a big deal. Where it heads from here should be as nonpartisan and fair as possible, led by the evidence. Now, given this big news story, we've lined up some experts who are very good with legal evidence, and I'm very happy to turn to them now on a big news night. New York Times legal writer Emily Bazelon, former federal prosecutor John Flannery, and Jason Johnson, professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University, who will bring up the inevitable political aspects of this. We'll turn to Jason on that. I want to start on the law and ask Emily, what does it mean in English when at this juncture the New York Attorney General makes an announcement and a confirmation like this?
Well, we know that the New York Attorney General's office is going to bring additional resources and firepower to this case. We also know that she has been in charge of a civil inquiry, that the district attorney's office is running a criminal inquiry. And now we're going to see how the threads of those two lines kind of braid together. They seem to be interested in the same kinds of questions and material about fraud, about taxes, about these kinds of payments you were describing. And now these offices are going to come together. And the fact that they are joining forces, I would say, is not good news for Donald Trump.
Not good news for Donald Trump. And John Flannery, who has been a counsel to congressional investigations and dealt with very complex prosecutions. John, I think you would agree with me that the courtrooms of New York are not the place to settle any political disagreements with Donald Trump. This is a huge story for any ex-president. If a different ex-president in whatever party were in this situation, it would also be our lead story. It would be a huge deal, notwithstanding some of the fatigue people have about this ex-president. So walk us through what is legally and potentially criminally important here, separate from people's views of Donald Trump.
Well, I think separate from his views is his conduct, which we wouldn't expect to have an honest description from him. And I think that we have an ability to understand where this investigation is going. Usually you'd have an AG and a DA worried about turf battles. Instead, these two heavyweights have come together. And I think the reason they came together and when they came together was in February of this year. In February, the DA got the tax records. And he soon after that said, I don't like Steve Bannon's pardon. And he was concerned about that. The AG had also looked at that because of her expertise in charity work. Next thing we know is assistant attorney generals are embedded in the DA's office. While what is the DA doing? The DA is squeezing Weisselberg to give evidence. Now, they're squeezing him for whatever they claim he did wrong as the chief financial officer for 20 years. And 20 years before that, he was handling all the books and records. So they target him, but they also go after Barry, his son. And I think, the tax subpoenas and so forth were to say, did you declare these things? Did you declare that wonderful luxury apartment? Did you declare this income you got for tuition for your children? What about that job, that no-show job you have down in Central Park? So I think they're squeezing Weisselberg by squeezing his son. Now, who else are they squeezing? Steve Bannon. So what is going to come out of this? I'm not sure they have decided how they're going to carve this up. But when you go from a civil case of significance to a criminal case, you've decided that the Trump organization is the subject of investigation. The organization, Trump, and the children identified by the AG in the past. So I think this is a big deal. Now, they have done more in New York between the AG and the DA than anybody else in America. You want to have guts for glory, they have it. And I think that they're looking to close. For one thing, they have to be concerned about the statute of limitations. Now, going back to Weisselberg, we had no less than Mark Pomerantz, who knows his way around a tough interrogation, who's been working over Weisselberg, and Vance, who's no sleeper himself when it comes to asking questions, has been attending and watching this rather than participating himself, because he wants this to be done efficiently, and he wants this done while it's on his watch, and he wants it done before the election, and he's concerned about the statute of limitations. So what do we have here? We have a day of horror for the Trump organization, all of them, from Trump right down through the family, finances, and everything else. And you know what? You can go and do trash talk all you want on TV, and Trump has some experience at that. But it doesn't mean anything. Whatever your title was before this investigation began, you're in a tough place. And I think we'll see a day of reckoning. I can't say when because we don't know enough. They've been very careful to contain what they're doing.
John Flannery laying out about 5 different distinct points. He does it seemingly without notes. It's quite striking. Young lawyers could learn from you, sir. And you mentioned one of the 5 points I want to get to before.
If you can't do this, you shouldn't be in a court. You know, it's the thing about a fool for a client. You gotta have a fool for an attorney. You know.
Fair. Well, but. Of the 5, I want to go to one on the law, and then Jason's going to come in on the way Trump is playing this, because you mentioned who we're dealing with here, and this is important. Bob Mueller got a lot of attention over time, and he was well known in public life. But right now, the person who has as much, if not more, power than Mueller with regard to Donald Trump's future is someone who Donald Trump can't touch, can't affect. He may be camped out in Florida or elsewhere, but New York Attorney General Letitia James has become a big player here. She ran saying she would seek truth wherever she found it. She's been in office 2 years now and tenaciously has been saying she'll hold power accountable.
In this state, we have a set of laws that every individual and entity must be held accountable to, regardless of who you are, regardless of your power.
Now, those are words. Does the record show it? Well, it's included, regardless of who you are, a probe into the top Democrat in all of New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo. Now, Trump is playing his defense today partly by arguing that James is somehow only going after him or Republicans. He accuses her of, quote, literally campaigning on prosecuting him. So briefly, John, what is the legal standing, if any, of that kind of counterattack? And then Jason will pick up the political dynamics that Trump's trying to lean into, something that he has rhetorically benefited from before, when he can make it about the deep state, in this case, the state of New York. John?
Well, you know, Trump, depends on the ignorance of the public not to know that AG is already investigating Cuomo on 2 investigations that have been identified publicly. And if they lead to something else, they'll lead to something else. Whereas Trump, we've been looking at him for years now, and we have had agreements, and he's paid $2 million as a result of the fraud of one of his earlier charities, which sort of rhymes like this problem here when you're talking about Steve Bannon. So, you know, the trouble with Trump is the only time you can ever rely on anything he says, policy-wise or truth, is if he is implicating himself in misconduct. That is the only time you can rely on him. And he doesn't do it intentionally.
That might be a little harsh.
Well, he's not my pal. You know, there isn't a person in New York.
What if he orders? Well, you know, John, it's overstatement. I mean, what if he orders a cheeseburger? Can you rely on the words to connote that he wants a burger?
Well, you mean his appetite? Well, I know he loves McDonald's.
I don't mean it that way. I just mean now I really feel like I'm in law school. I just mean you said such a judgmental statement that there are other times where his words have some content, although I will take your point and take it out to Jason, that Donald Trump has been a documented liar. So the idea that much of what he says about this or that case or defense doesn't go very far. What's he doing here trying to make this about a prosecutor that many in the nation may not have thought much about, the New York Attorney General?
Well, what he's done all along.
This is the thing, Ari.
I'm sorry. I'm going to Jason now. Sorry.
Excuse me, Jason.
Yeah. So Ari, this is the thing. This has always been Donald Trump's go-to. When I get in trouble, I find someone to attack. I say there's an enemy, and if it happens to be a black woman, all the better. But we have to understand the larger context here, why he's doing this, right? The corruption in the Trump the Trump organization, it's been out there. They've been playing with money. They've been avoiding taxes. And they've been doing this with impunity. They were all acting fresh as heck while the feds were watching because he knew that William Barr would protect him under any investigation. Well, now that's over. He's not the president anymore. He can't get people to just cover for him. So his best bet is, hey, look over here. Look at the black woman attacking me. Hey, look at the Democrats in the deep state. Here's the problem right now, though. He's not in power. His kids aren't in power. Nobody really owes him anything. Maybe some of the Republicans do, but a lot of the political leadership, they don't owe anything to Donald Trump. So I don't think no matter how many 909 word statements and documents he releases, I don't think he's going to be able to be as effective this time in rhetorically distracting people as he has been in the past. And if this investigation ends up going, because it's only a small group that runs this, if this investigation ends up finally hitting Ivanka or Jared or any of his kids, that will have an impact on their political fortunes heading into 2022 because it could make other members of his family toxic beyond just him.
Emily, take a listen to how Letitia James has discussed the fact that no one's above the law.
He should be charged with obstructing justice. I believe that the President of these United States can be indicted for criminal offenses.
That's a partly legal question from a couple years ago, Emily, but it also speaks to how she's carved out her role. She doesn't seem afraid of the Democratic governor or the former Republican president or any of that.
Right. I mean, what you want here is the independence of the attorney general, of the district attorney, and the fact that they are representing New York State as opposed to the federal government puts them at a different level of our federalist system than the one that Donald Trump used to be at the head of. And that, I think, is an asset for their independence. What you don't want is a prosecutor or an attorney general who's already made up his or her mind or who has a political axe to grind. And so I think it's on all of us to watch this really carefully and make sure that whoever, if there is an indictment, that it is super compelling. And yeah, that might mean there's a higher standard for charging a former president. But given the political significance of that, given how weighty it is to have criminal charges against someone who used to run the country, I think that's okay. I think that's actually a good thing if we're all watching, especially carefully, and making sure that these prosecutors really have their ducks lined up in a row.
Right. And I mean, it's pick your plot, whether it's a movie or a classic novel. This is building to potentially one of the biggest decisions they have to make, and they have to make it for the right reasons in the right way, and it will be scrutinized and pressured in every direction. So we've heard from many people in these tough calls before, the best thing, of course, is for them to just make the right call based on the evidence, even at a potentially higher justifiable standard that Emily reminds us, because people who are charged, well, you got to bring them to New York, and you get the booking photo, and the whole country sees that booking, and then you go through the rest of the process. Whoever those people may or may not be at Trump org, this is the whole big enchilada, or as John would say, the Trumpy cheeseburger. I got to fit in a break. We've gone 20 minutes on the big story. My thanks to Emily, John, and Jason.